Have you ever felt yourself shrink in a room? That's what it was like sitting in that leather chair, the scent of old paper and my sister's expensive perfume filling the air. The lawyer's voice droned on, listing assets and properties, each word a gilded brick building a palace for my sister, Charlotte. When he finally said my name, all that was left for me was a key to a house so rotten. My sister later slipped me $100 bill for demolition costs. I thought that was the worst humiliation I would face that day. I was wrong. The real betrayal was waiting for me at home, packing its bags and getting ready to move in with the winner. Before I dive into my story, I'd really appreciate it if you could let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you'd consider subscribing to my channel, it would mean the world to me and help me keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Amelia, and I have learned that the heaviest silences are found in the rooms where a family's fate is decided. I sat in a chair that felt far too large for me, the polished mahogany of the conference table reflecting a distorted, smaller version of myself. The air in the lawyer's office was thick with the scent of old leather and my sister Charlotte's perfume, a fragrance that cost more than my monthly rent and announced her presence before she even spoke. Charlotte herself was a vision of success, her cream-colored blazer perfectly tailored, a string of pearls resting on her collarbone like a delicate trophy. She checked her phone, her expression bored, as if dividing our grandfather's legacy was just another inconvenient appointment in her busy schedule. She had always been the sun our family orbited around, while I was the quiet, shadowy planet caught in her gravitational pull. Mr. Gable, the lawyer, finally cleared his throat, his voice as dry as old parchment. He spoke of stocks, bonds, and commercial properties in the city's financial district. Each asset he named was followed by the same two words: to my granddaughter, Charlotte. With every word, I could feel myself shrinking further into the plush leather, becoming less and less visible in the shadow of her growing empire. Then he turned to me, his expression softening with a hint of pity. And to my granddaughter, Amelia, he read, pausing for a moment. I leave the key to my seaside estate in Blackwood, Maine, and all of its contents. A single, rusty iron key was pushed across the table toward me. It looked ancient, heavy with the weight of stories I had never been told. The room fell silent. Charlotte let out a soft, almost inaudible laugh, a sound of pure disbelief. The estate was a family joke, a dilapidated collection of strange angles and sagging roofs that our grandfather, Arthur, had tinkered with for decades. We called it Arthur's Folly. It was worthless, a monument to a brilliant mind's eccentric decline. The meeting ended. As we stood to leave, Charlotte glided over to me. She didn't look at me, but at the key in my hand. Then, she opened her designer handbag, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and tucked it into my palm. For the demolition fees. Darling, she whispered, her voice laced with a condescending sweetness I knew all too well. Don't let that old pile of rocks trouble you. I drove home through the city, the lights blurring through the unshed tears in my eyes. The $100 bill felt like a hot coal in my coat pocket. I thought the humiliation was over for the day, that the worst had already happened. I was profoundly wrong. The true demolition was waiting for me in my own apartment. I walked in to find Liam, my husband of 5 years, calmly folding his shirts into a sleek, expensive suitcase on our bed. It wasn't the frantic packing of an argument, but the methodical, organized packing of a decision that had been made long ago. My heart stopped beating for a second. Going somewhere, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't look up from a perfectly folded cashmere sweater. We need to talk. Amelia? He zipped up a side pocket with a sound of chilling finality. This isn't working anymore. I'm moving out. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under my weight, the room suddenly feeling tilted and unsafe. What are you talking about? Liam, where are you going? The questions felt stupid, pointless, but they were the only ones I had. He finally looked at me, his eyes cool and appraising, like he was looking at a property that had failed to meet its investment potential. "I'm moving in with Charlotte," he said, the words delivered without a trace of emotion. "She's offered me a partnership at her firm. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. I need to be with a winner, Amelia, someone who understands ambition." The air left my lungs in a painful rush. It wasn't just a breakup, it was a corporate merger. I was being downsized from my own life. He saw the shock on my face, the utter devastation. And for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, perhaps guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of resolute ambition. He picked up his suitcase and walked to the door, a stranger in the home we had built together. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, turning back to me one last time. "Oh, by the way," he said, his tone casual, "Charlotte mentioned your grandfather had a collection of antique clocks. She thinks they might still be at the estate. Don't throw anything away until she can have someone come and check. It might be the only valuable thing you have left." And then he was gone. I was left alone in the sudden, crushing silence, surrounded by the ghost of a life I thought was mine. That first week was a blur of sleepless nights and hollow days. Then, just as I was starting to contemplate my next move, Charlotte called. Her voice was syrupy sweet, oozing a false concern that made my skin crawl. She insisted on taking me to lunch, to a trendy downtown restaurant where being seen was more important than the food. I agreed, knowing it was a performance. She arrived late, making a grand entrance that turned every head in the room. "Amelia, darling," she said, air kissing me. "You look so tired. This whole ordeal has been terribly hard on you." The lunch was a masterclass in manipulation. She spoke loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear about how she was taking care of her poor sister. She recounted a sanitized version of Liam's departure, framing it as a tragic but necessary career move that I, in my simple way, couldn't understand. Then she got to the real point. "About that dreadful house," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Liam and I were thinking, it's a huge burden for you. Why don't you let us take it off your hands? We can have our lawyers handle the paperwork. You won't have to lift a finger. We just need to make sure we retrieve grandfather's old clocks first. They have sentimental value. You understand." It was the final push I needed. This wasn't concern, it was a cleanup operation. The drive to Maine felt different after that. It was no longer a retreat, it was an investigation. My used truck rattled over potholes, the radio playing static, a fitting soundtrack to the new determination in my head. When I finally found the dirt road that led to the estate, it felt like a path to the truth. And then I saw it. The house wasn't just dilapidated. It was a defiant piece of art against the gray, stormy sky. It squatted on the cliffside, a chaotic assembly of stone, glass, and wood that seemed to have grown out of the rock itself. It was both a ruin and a masterpiece. And for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of belonging. The old key turned in the lock with a groan. The air inside wasn't musty or rotten as I expected, but cool and clean, smelling of sea salt and old wood. The main room was vast, dominated by a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, and lined with empty bookshelves that rose 2 stories high. My grandfather, I realized, hadn't left them empty. He had left them as a puzzle. I spent a day running my hands along the bare shelves, feeling for a switch, a latch, anything finally. My fingers closed around a book carving on a support beam that twisted slightly. With a low rumble, a section of the massive bookcase swung inward, revealing not a small compartment, but an entire hidden room. It was his workshop. The air smelled of the wood shavings, turpentine, and old paper. Tools hung in perfect order on the walls, and in the center of the room was a massive drafting table. This was my grandfather's heart. And on that table, I found it, a single thick leather-bound ledger and a sealed envelope with my name, Amelia, written in my grandfather's spidery, elegant handwriting. My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal. "My dearest Amelia," The letter began, "If you are reading this, it means you have found my sanctuary. Charlotte saw only objects and their monetary value. But you, my dear, have an artist's eye. You see the soul of things. You have a builder's heart. That is why I have entrusted you with the greater inheritance, the truth." He went on, explaining his reasoning. "You may wonder why I never confronted her. I learned long ago that you cannot reason with a person who does not value truth. To accuse your sister would only invite her to create more elaborate lies. So I chose a different path. I did not accuse, I documented. I believe that true justice is not a loud argument, but the quiet, undeniable weight of facts, presented at the proper time. I have laid the foundation. My dear girl, it is up to you to build the case." The ledger was his life's work, a meticulous record of every transaction, every hidden masterpiece, every powerful client. I opened the book. The pages were filled with names I recognized from business magazines and society pages. Next to their names were descriptions of items paintings by old masters, forgotten royal jewels, historical documents, all hidden away in vaults around the world. It was an arsenal. And as I turned to the very last page, my blood ran cold. There, at the bottom, was a final, meticulously detailed entry. The client's name was Charlotte Montgomery. The transaction was listed as Blue Reef Real Estate Development. The notes detailed how she had used forged provenance documents to inflate the value of a corporate art collection to secure the massive loan that had launched her real estate empire. It was a sophisticated act of bank fraud, a crime built on paper and lies. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked along the cliff edge under a sky full of cold, distant stars. The heavy ledger clutched in my hands. Part of me wanted to just disappear. I could use the legitimate parts of the collection to fund a new life somewhere no one knew my name. But as I stood there, the wind whipping my hair, I thought of my grandfather's words about my builder's heart. This wasn't just about my pain. It was about his legacy. Charlotte had not only built her career on a lie, but she had also spat on the principles he held dear. The decision settled in me, as solid as the rock beneath my feet. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice. I spent the next day planning. The first step was a call to Mr. Ashwood. I rehearsed the words until they were smooth and steady. "Mr. Ashwood." I began when his assistant put me through. "My name is Amelia Vance, Arthur Vance's granddaughter. I'm calling from his estate in Maine. I was going through his professional papers and found a file on your acquisition of the 18th century celestial globe. I have reason to believe a fraudulent copy of that document has been used in a recent financial transaction by Charlotte Montgomery. I thought you would want to know." There was a long silence. "I will be on the next flight," he said, and the line went dead. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Charlotte's number. I pitched my voice to sound exactly as she expected, broken, lost, and pathetic. I told her the house was too much for me. I did find some of those old clocks Liam mentioned. I whimpered. "I guess you should have them if you want them." The line was quiet for a beat, and I could almost hear the gears of greed turning. "Don't touch anything, Amelia," she said, her voice suddenly sharp. "Liam and I will drive up tomorrow. We'll bring the paperwork to have you sign the property over to me. We'll take care of everything." The next day, I prepared the stage. Charlotte and Liam arrived just before noon, stepping out of her sleek black SUV like conquering heroes. They wore expensive weekend clothes, their faces a mixture of pity for me and triumphant greed. "Amelia, you look rustic," she said. "Don't worry, we're here to solve all your problems." I led them into the main room, where I had a small fire crackling in the hearth. I let them explain the documents. When they pushed the pen toward me, I picked it up, then set it down again. "I sent an email to my lawyer this morning," I said, my voice trembling convincingly. I opened my laptop and showed them a drafted email. It was a clumsy, emotional plea, threatening to sue her for emotional distress and use some of grandfather's old business papers to demand a settlement. Charlotte actually laughed, a short, sharp sound of contempt. Oh, Amelia, you really have no idea how this works. Do you? You think you can blackmail me with some dusty old papers? You're pathetic. You're probably right, I said, my voice suddenly clear and calm. That's why I decided on a different approach. I closed the email draft and clicked on a different file. The television screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a high-resolution image of a page from the ledger. The name at the top was one of Charlotte's biggest investors. Charlotte's face went pale. I clicked the remote again. Another page, another powerful client, another dirty secret. And then I showed them the final page, the one with Charlotte's name on it, detailing her fraud in my grandfather's undeniable script. "What is this?" Charlotte hissed. "Where did you get that? He left it for me." I said simply. "He left me the truth." Just as Charlotte opened her mouth to scream, the heavy front door swung open. An older, impeccably dressed man stepped inside, his face calm, but his eyes as hard as granite. It was Mr. Ashwood. He looked past me, his gaze landing squarely on my sister. "Charlotte," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority, "it seems you and I have a great deal to discuss." The collapse, when it came, was not a loud explosion but a quiet, swift implosion. Mr. Ashwood didn't want a public scandal. He wanted his pound of flesh. He and Charlotte's other powerful clients systematically dismantled her empire. A few weeks into the scandal, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Liam's mother. She was hysterical, sobbing, begging me to stop. "He made a mistake, Amelia," she cried. "Don't ruin his life over a mistake. Have you no mercy?" I listened patiently until she was finished. "I'm sorry you're hurting," I said, my voice calm and even. "But Liam is an adult who made his own choices. The consequences are his to bear, not mine to forgive." I ended the call and blocked the number. The last tether to my old life was cut. Mr. Ashwood arranged a meeting for me with his personal lawyer, a woman with eyes as sharp as her suit. She explained the process of becoming an anonymous informant, protecting me while ensuring the ledger's information reached the right federal agencies. For the first time, I felt the true weight of my grandfather's legacy, not as a burden, but as a responsibility. I was no longer a victim. I was a witness. I didn't just inherit a house, I inherited a project. The restoration became a metaphor for my own healing. I remember finding a large circular stained glass window in the attic, covered in dust and boarded up. My grandfather must have planned to install it. It depicted a solitary, resilient tree on a cliffside, its branches reaching for the sun. I spent a month carefully cleaning each piece of colored glass, replacing the cracked leading, and finally, installing it in the main hall where a blank wall had once been. The first time the morning sun shone through it, casting vibrant patterns of light across the room, I felt a piece of my own soul, long boarded up, finally let the light in. My business grew organically from there. I started my own firm, Arthur's Folly Restorations. My first major client was an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, who owned a historic home her children wanted to sell to developers. I not only restored the house to its former glory, but I also used my grandfather's journals on architectural history to help her get the property landmark status, protecting it forever. I was no longer just fixing buildings. I was preserving legacies. I found a quiet joy in my work, in waking up to the sound of the ocean and spending my days sketching designs in my grandfather's workshop, a space that now felt like my own. About a year after the confrontation, I saw a picture of Charlotte online. It was a grainy tabloid photo of her leaving a courthouse, her face pale and haggard, a cheap coat draped over her expensive but now ill-fitting suit. She looked like a stranger, a ghost from a life I no longer recognized. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a profound sadness for the person she could have been, and I closed the browser. A few months later, a letter arrived from the low-security federal prison where she was serving a 4-year sentence. It was a long letter, filled with words of remorse, regret, and a desperate plea for forgiveness. I read it once, standing in my sun-filled living room, that evening. I walked out to the stone fire pit I had built on the cliff's edge. I crumpled her letter into a ball, tossed it into the flames, and watched as the paper turned black, curled into ash, and disappeared into the night sky. My life found a new, peaceful rhythm. Then, one morning, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender was Liam. The subject line was simply Amelia. It was a long, rambling message, a pathetic monument to his own self-pity. He wrote about his miserable sales job, how Charlotte had manipulated him, and how he often wondered what could have been. I read the first paragraph and felt a profound sense of distance. He was a ghost from a different lifetime, a man I no longer knew. I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt nothing at all. I didn't need to burn this letter. It had no power over me. I simply moved my cursor, clicked delete, and then created a filter to send any future emails from him directly to the trash. I didn't need to forgive anyone. I just needed to be free. And in the quiet solitude of my grandfather's house, my house, I finally was.